to the Student Wellness and Leadership Summit. My name is Monica Kara.
My name is Smriti Narayanan.
And my name is Vivian Didsbury. We are your MCs for today. We are really excited for everyone here to get to interact with our speakers and to have a day where we learn a variety of different topics.
Vivian, Smriti, and I are all students from different states across the nation. We have all taken a step forward with our journey at the Student Wellness and Leadership Movement this summer, and we are here to help you all through your journey as well.
The conference you're all attending today has been composed over the last couple of months by the amazing team here at SWL. At SWL, we strive to empower the leaders, innovators, and creators of tomorrow to take control of their futures and to inspire and lead conversations on mental wellness, leadership, and what it means to create a healthier future for our world.
Our purpose is to help people understand all aspects of their mental health, big and small, in a safe space. We also want to give teenagers an opportunity to talk to professionals and other peers that have gone through similar experiences, to connect and create a community.
SWL's core values include belonging, respect, integrity, dedication, growth, and empowerment. These values embody how SWL wants to improve our community. Our values guide us now in everything that we do and will continue to do so in the future.
Our conference aims to reach a large number of individuals and focuses on spreading the importance of mental health. A number of our speakers are connected to that topic and are also focusing on student empowerment, as we aim to provide a safe space for teenagers and an opportunity to converse with professionals. We have a number of teams working together to get this conference where it is at.
These teams in SWL include the branding team, the action team, the coordinator team, the partnerships and wellness bundles team, the marketing team, the nonprofit team, the point of contact team, the program team, and finally the register and IT support team. Along these, we also have a number of smaller teams such as our TikTok team, core team, email team, and animation team working on publicity and reaching out to our supporters. So from the team at SWL, we'd like to say a really big thank you to everyone who participated and played a really big role in making this conference where it is.
In addition to the SWL team, SWL also has a number of strategic partners and sponsors to help us further our mission and well-being. Most partners are youth-led and prominent voices in the mental health movement. If you would like to learn more about our partners and sponsors, please check out our wellness bundle.
Mental health and mental well-being are topics that greatly affect teenagers all over the world. Oftentimes, it is tough to open up and talk about how you are truly feeling. And as high schoolers ourselves, we hope to understand the struggle others are facing and put it into perspective for our community. We felt the need to address this widespread issue in our nation by organizing a movement that would not only work on addressing the effects mental health has on students, but also to show we are not alone in this. Mental health has always been a topic that is close to me. My aunt is a psychiatrist for depression and anxiety patients, and this was a topic that was always mentioned during family dinners or even when I was just talking to her. And because of this, mental well-being has always been something that I've been interested in and wanted to spread awareness on.
So my journey with SWL initially began this summer, and I noticed one thing that when I joined the team, it was such a really inclusive and open community of individuals, specifically youth and high school students throughout the entire country. So as we know, members of SWL have a strong prominence and relationship which is really passionate to a number of topics, but specifically mental health is one of the most prominent ones. My path with mental health has always been kind of down low, but recently after I joined the SWL, I've kind of realized that it's really important and it has a really big impact on the numerous different sections of our lives.
We are currently in the opening session for day one. Afterwards, we'll have our first keynote speaker, Dr. Doty, which will have a roughly 30-minute presentation. Then we'll have a 5-minute break before our second mini session with Alexandra Zhu, Cara De Langa, Hannah and Charlie Lucas, Christine Winston-Talo, and Dr. Francisco Sidral. Then we'll have a 10-minute break before our activity, which will last roughly 25 minutes. We'll have a 5-minute break, and then our second mini session with Kelsey DeVico, Leka Dabe, Jamil Zaki, Dr. Jay Marks, Nick Bradar, and Courtney Fortin. Then we'll have a 10-minute break before our second keynote speaker, Dr. Johnson. It'll be a 30-minute presentation, and then we will have our closing session and end the first day of the SWL conference.
Be sure to follow along with any information and schedules outlined in the Wellness Bundle. This document will have all the links to the sessions and will also have information regarding the amazing speakers you will get to interact with. In addition, we have touched more on who we are as an organization and our teams if you are interested in learning more.
If along the way you do have any questions or feedback, there is a Google form located in your Wellness Bundle. Be sure to keep following along with the schedule on there to see topics, speakers, giveaway information, and so many more cool facts our team has compiled. So without ado, let us get right into our first speaker of the SWL conference.
Good afternoon from California. Let me now introduce our next speaker, Dr. James R. Doty, the founder and director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at Stanford University, of which His Holiness the Dalai Lama is the founding benefactor. He works with a variety of scientists from a number of disciplines examining the neural bases for compassion and altruism. He is also a clinical professor in the Department of Neurosurgery at Stanford University School of Medicine. Dr. Doty is an inventor, entrepreneur, and philanthropist. He holds a number of patents on devices which are used on patients around the world. He has founded multiple startups and is the former CEO of Accuray. He has provided support to a number of charitable organizations supporting peace initiatives and providing healthcare throughout the world. Dr. Doty has funded research, provided scholarships, and endowed shares at multiple universities. He is a veteran of the U.S. Army, having spent 9 years on active duty service in the Army Medical Corps. He is on the board of a number of nonprofits and is the former chairman of the Dalai Lama Foundation and the former vice chair of the Charter for Compassion. Doty is the senior editor of the recently published Oxford Handbook of Compassion Science and is the author of the New York Times bestseller Into the Magic Shop, a neurosurgeon's quest to discover the mysteries of the brain and the secrets of the heart, that has now been translated into 36 languages. His work has been cited in media throughout the world, including the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, The Guardian, Time Magazine, and many others. Let's all welcome Dr. Doty and learn more about imposter syndrome.
Hello, my name is Dr. Jim Doty, and I'm a professor of neurosurgery at Stanford University. And I'm the founder and director of the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. At the center, we study compassion, altruism, empathy, and have developed a variety of techniques for dealing with stress and anxiety. Today, I'm appreciative of being invited to speak at the Student Wellness and Leadership Conference. What I'd like to speak about today is something that's commonly known as imposter syndrome. And this is the idea that, especially among high-achieving individuals, that they fear that they're going to be found out as a fraud and not as accomplished as many people think they are. The other aspect of this syndrome is that many of these individuals have a difficult time internalizing their accomplishments or even accepting compliments. In some ways, this reverts back to compassion, especially compassion for self. Before I talk about that, though, I want to give you a little bit of background on our evolution as a species, which will set the stage for explaining and understanding imposter syndrome. When we evolved as a species to have something called theory of mind, abstract thinking, complex language, it required that our offspring are actually cared for in a direct fashion, unlike the offspring of many species, which actually run off into the forest or the jungle immediately after birth. And in fact, our offspring have to mirror our behaviors to learn. And there's something called the mirror neuron system. So our offspring must look to us to set an example and to teach them how to behave and, more importantly, survive in what is oftentimes a hostile environment. Conversely, the parent or caregiver has the responsibility for caring for this child for 13, 14, 15 years of their lives at an immense cost in terms of resources and energy. Why would someone do that? The reason is that when they care, when they nurture, when they are compassionate, then they're actually rewarded. And the way they're rewarded is that there is a release of neurotransmitters. One which you may be familiar with is oxytocin, often called the nurturing or love hormone. And when this hormone is released, those parts of your brain that are associated with reward and pleasure increase their metabolism. So you feel good when you care and you nurture. The other interesting thing about our species is that we have this unique ability to intuit from an individual's facial expression, body habitus, voice intonation, and even their smell, their emotional state. So we have an incredible ability to determine if a person is suffering or in pain or needs assistance. And this is very, very important to our survival. As we evolve from the hunter-gatherer tribes, as we evolve from the nuclear family to hunter-gatherer tribes, what happened is that the same attributes that allowed our species to survive and thrive were just as important. And remember that until 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, humans lived in groups of 50 to 100. Additionally, our DNA actually has not changed in the last 200,000 years. We're the same person, genetic-wise, as lived on the savanna in Africa. Why is all of this important? Well, when a member of your tribes was suffering or in pain, you were able to intuit that, and you instinctively knew that if they did not do their job within the community, it could put the community at risk in this hostile environment. So again, this was another motivator to care, to be kind, and to be compassionate. Just to clarify what compassion means, it's the recognition of another's suffering with a motivational desire to alleviate that suffering. One other aspect that relates to our DNA not changing in the last 200,000 years is the fact that when we are in an environment where we are potentially at risk, as an example, let's say you're in the forest and you see the grass move some distance away from you. That is a signal potentially that there is a predator there and that you need to be aware of that and act accordingly. As a result, situations such as this, where you are potentially at risk, have a tendency to stick to you so that you remember them. When you're in situations of safety, you don't need to remember anything because you're not at risk in any way. And this same reality is with us still today. And in fact, this part of our nervous system called the autonomic nervous system, which has two parts, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system, remains essentially unchanged from 200,000 years ago. Because, as you know, evolution is extraordinarily slow, happening over hundreds of thousands of years, while modern technology, or how we have evolved as a species, effectively is occurring at lightning speed. So the evolutionary attributes that were with us 200,000 years ago really have not significantly changed. Why is this important? Well, I mentioned the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is that system which we associate with what we call the flight, fight, or freeze response, while the parasympathetic nervous system is associated with what is commonly called the rest and digest system. This is the system where you're relaxed, you're comfortable, you're open, you're thoughtful. And in fact, this part of our brain called our executive control function area in the frontal region works at its best while you're in this rest and digest mode. When you're in this mode where your parasympathetic nervous system is stimulated, what happens is you're much more thoughtful, you're much more aware, you're able to make much more discerning decisions, versus when your sympathetic nervous system is stimulated and you are reactive, making very quick decisions that you may believe are necessary for your survival. As a result of these two systems, this determines how we react in a variety of situations. And this is not a one-way street, it's a two-way street that arises in your brainstem and is distributed actually via the autonomic nervous system or the vagus nerve throughout your entire body, but is most especially represented in your heart. How does all of this relate to imposter syndrome? I mentioned to you that negative things have a tendency to stick to you. And unfortunately, especially high achieving individuals have a tendency, have a tendency to be very critical of themselves and have a dialogue oftentimes that's going on in their head that says, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I can't do this, I can't do that. And oftentimes the reason is because they've either heard comments or have intuitively created this narrative. And this negative narrative sticks to them. As I told you, unfortunately, as a byproduct of this evolutionary process, where we are attuned to negative things that put us at risk, it also has a tendency to make negative comments stick to us. And as a result, we repeat them in our head, even though, in fact, they may not necessarily be true at all. As a result, many people have an ongoing negative dialogue in their head that again repeats these statements of I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough. People are going to find out that I'm not qualified to do this job, that I am, quote unquote, an imposter. When you have this negative dialogue going on in your head, what it unfortunately does oftentimes is it hijacks you from actually being open and seeing the world in terms of its real state, not what you are telling yourself. In some ways, there's a quote that I think epitomizes this, that it says, it's not what you are that holds you back, it's what you think you are not. And in some ways, that's what this negative dialogue is telling you. Repeatedly, it's telling you you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you don't belong. It's interesting. You can think of this as a circle, a small circle that represents yourself, and then it's sitting within a large circle. And the circle that the small circle is saying what I know, and within this larger circle is this idea of people knowing what you actually don't know. Versus the reality is that, yes, there's a certain amount that you don't know, but it's not nearly as large as you create within this narrative that you tell yourself. The negative self-talk actually is very common. Something like 89% of individuals have this feeling that they don't belong in their situation, and in fact, that they're not good enough or smart enough, etc. One of the techniques that has been helpful in overcoming this is, first of all, understanding that this negative dialogue does not represent truth or reality. And that in fact, you can actually change the dialogue from one of negativity to one of positivity. In fact, as a child, I had this negative dialogue and felt as a result that I had no future, that there were not possibilities for me. And as a result, I was filled with a sense of hopelessness and despair. And fortunately, through the assistance of a teacher, and I call her teacher, her name was Ruth, and interestingly enough, she worked in a magic shop, believe it or not. And you can learn about this story in a book that I wrote, which was a New York Times bestseller called Into the Magic Shop, a neurosurgeon's quest to discover the secrets of the brain and the mysteries of the heart. I talk about the techniques that she taught me, which allowed me to change my internal dialogue. And one of the things, besides a mindfulness and breathing practice, which actually shifts you from this fear mode, which facilitates this negative dialogue, to engagement of your parasympathetic nervous system, then allows you to do the next step, which is changing this negative dialogue. So with intention, instead of allowing the negative dialogue to proceed, I would intentionally interfere with the dialogue by saying, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, I deserve love, I deserve to be recognized for my accomplishments, I am worthy. It's interesting how many people who are very accomplished have a hard time accepting a compliment from another person because they don't believe themselves that they're worthy of that compliment. So after some period of time, I was able to change this internal dialogue to one of self-affirmation, acceptance, and recognize that when I did that, actually, it also helped me look at the world in a different way because of the fact that I changed from this constant internal dialogue, which was self-focused, to one of looking outward and at other people and realizing that many people, if not all, are suffering to some extent from the same negative dialogue, also from the fact that they also had their own problems, which they were dealing with. And oftentimes, what I would interpret as somebody being critical of me or not being nice really had nothing to do with me. It was them who was acting out their own fears and anxiousness. And I was letting it affect me. Many of you have probably not heard of the Dunning-Kruger effect. You know, if we were to put on an axis, the vertical axis being perceived ability and the horizontal axis, actual ability, it's interesting that people who suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect are people who have a perception of their ability being much greater than their actual ability. And in fact, this is a well-documented syndrome. Versus oftentimes people with imposter syndrome, they feel they have little ability, but in fact, they have significant ability. And it's an interesting paradox between these two groups of people. How do you then overcome this feeling that you're an imposter? Well, I think one of the first things you have to do is, first of all, understand the basis of these feelings. Two, understand that this narrative that you've created for yourself is a false narrative. It's not truth. Three, be able to comfortably sit and acknowledge your own abilities and acknowledge your own achievements and recognize that they occurred because of your own efforts and hard work and that you deserve them. And you shouldn't be shy about accepting a compliment or acknowledging to yourself and in fact the world that you did in fact accomplish something. In modern society, one of the challenges is that so often people compare themselves to others. And in some ways, this sets the stage for this imposter syndrome feeling. You compare yourself to others, you're hypercritical, then you look at these people and believe that they're very successful, that they've never had any problems, that they've never struggled, that they're more accomplished than you. They seemingly do it effortlessly, and you are working extraordinarily hard, and you feel as if you're going to be found out for your lack of abilities. And nothing could be further from the truth. oftentimes the people who you're looking at and comparing yourself with feel the exact same way you do, and in fact, suffer just as you're suffering. Nothing in the world comes easily. Nothing occurs without effort. And the fact that others acknowledge your accomplishments should make you proud of yourself. Additionally, you should recognize that there's not a single human being who is perfect. There's not a single human being who cannot improve themselves. And as a result, you should accept this reality, understanding that all of us are a work in progress. None of us are perfect. None of us effortlessly do anything. And working hard, having perseverance, having grit are the attributes that allow you to succeed in life. But those successes should be able to be acknowledged as your own accomplishments and not perceived as, if only I had done this, or if only I had done that, I would have achieved more. We are all works in progress. There's not a single one of us who is necessarily the best at everything. I have had students who are extraordinarily accomplished, and then they'll get less than the grade they expected, and they beat themselves up, and they say they're not good enough and they're not deserving. And this is very, very sad. You can't get straight A's, or at least very, very few people can get straight A's in every situation. The reality is there's always going to be someone who is smarter than you, more talented than you, more accomplished than you, and that is the nature of life. And you have to accept that reality. You have to accept the fact that you are not always going to be the best. You know, one of the saddest things I've seen, as an example at Stanford, is a student will be accepted to Stanford and they'll have been the valedictorian. They will have had excellent grades, excellent scores on their tests. And then they get to Stanford and they're no longer number one or the best, because almost everyone at Stanford has those same qualifications. And there's some extraordinarily, extraordinarily smart people there. And a number of students have gone into a depression because they had this view of themselves. And then they realize that there are others who have more accomplishments, have done better than they have. Instead of congratulating themselves that they're at Stanford and are able to interact with this extraordinarily group of students as well as teachers, they beat themselves up. And again, this does not do them any good, nor does it benefit them in the long term. What you should simply be thankful for is that you were able to attend Stanford, you're able to interact with all of these accomplished people, and you're one of them, and that you can learn something from each of these people. In some ways, this is the idea also of understanding that you aren't perfect, that you're going to fail, that you're not as good as everyone else, and just accept that reality and know that you're still, regardless, incredibly good. So this idea of being self-compassionate, I think, is one of the most important. We're able to sit, we're able to breathe, we're able to relax, and not let the negative dialogue rule you, but to be able to change that dialogue to one of self-affirmation, one of acknowledging both your accomplishments, but also the fact that you're a human being. I want to thank you all for having me with you today. I wish each and every one of you the best. Each of you has extraordinary potential, and each of you has the ability, if you so choose, to change the world. But the most important thing of any of this is accepting the fact that you're worthy, that you're okay as you are, and that so many other people are in a similar situation. Take care. Thank you for having me, and I wish each and every one of you the best. Thank you.
Thank you all for your amazing participation in the first session, and thank you to Dr. Doty for the wonderful presentation. So it was really, really cool to see the really cool facts and information that they presented, and I'm really interested in learning more about this topic. So for now, we're going to have a break, and during that break, feel free to get up, stretch your legs, and come back, and we'll see you again. Thank you.
If along the way you do have any questions or feedback, there is a Google form located in your wellness bundle. Be sure to keep following along with the wellness bundle schedule on there to see topics, speakers, giveaway information, and so many more cool facts our team has compiled.
break. And during that break, feel free to get up, stretch your legs, and come back, and we'll see you again. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who participated in the activity session and mini session. So during this time, we're going to have a quick 5-minute break period. And during this break period, feel free to get up, stretch your legs, grab a little snack, and join us back in the next session. So thank you, and we'll see you again in 5 minutes. Thank you to everyone who participated in the activity session and mini session. So during this time, we're going to have a quick 5-minute break period. And during this break period, feel free to get up, stretch your legs, grab a little snack, and join us back in the next session. So thank you, and we'll see you again in 5 minutes.
everyone, and I hope you've enjoyed the summit so far. You will shortly meet our next speaker, Dr. Brian Johnson, the Assistant Professor of Human Development and Family Studies at Michigan State University. He is also an attorney, and his scholarly interests focus on examining the constitutionality of laws and policies that affect youth and college-age populations. Dr. Johnson specializes in advising, recruitment, and retention initiatives that have been recognized at the university and state levels. And now let's jump into a session on invisible scars, insight into the effects of discrimination, biases, and microaggressions on youth.
Thank you so much, Claire, for that introduction, and thank you for all of the work that you are doing towards this conference. Not just you, but everyone who's played a role in it. I'm so honored to be a part of this presentation, and hopefully what we discussed today will help you moving forward. First of all, I want to check in and just ask how each of you are doing during these times. In the wake of COVID and in general, it's such a stressful time. And I think it's important that when we look at mental health, we talk about these issues. So when we talk about depression, we're going to look at depression and how it affects adolescents, youth in general. Then we're going to look at it from a more narrow perspective, how it affects African-American youth. And then we're going to talk even further about microaggressions. But before we do that, let's talk about how everyone is doing in the wake of COVID and depression in general. So when we look at depression, the statistics are startling. About 20% of all teens experience depression before they reach adulthood. Teens have reported higher stress levels than adults. One of the misconceptions is that teens, young adults, have no stress. You know, what do you have to worry about is a misconception. You don't have a job, you're not working, not a care in the world. And we know that not to be the case. So I think it's important that we recognize that and acknowledge that as well. Couple that with the added stressors during COVID. One study showed that 7 out of 10 teenagers struggled with their mental health during COVID-19 in some way. I'll repeat that statistic, 7 out of 10 teenagers struggled. So this is something that we need to talk about. This is something that we need to discuss. This is something that we need to look at as far as resources. So I'm so grateful for this opportunity to focus on mental health and wellness during adolescence, during young adulthood, and in general. Last statistic, 61% of teens reported feeling lonely during the pandemic. Not talking to someone, not reaching out. This COVID can be so isolating. And so hopefully after this discussion and after the conference, you'll be better equipped to talk about how you're feeling and how you can continue to make sure that you are in a good space mentally and emotionally. So when we talk about the stress and the added isolation, the added loneliness, here's some tips to handle stress during COVID-19 and in general from the National Conference for Behavioral Health. One of the things that's so important when there's so many inconsistencies and things that are unstable is to control what you can. That includes maintaining a routine with consistent sleep and consistent study patterns. So again, a lot of the things that are occurring are outside of our control. We can control certain things like how much rest you're getting, how much you're studying, the time that you're studying. So those are things to make sure that you are controlling and that you're making as consistent as possible. Trying to find some humor throughout the day. And I know these times are in so many ways not humorous, but looking for something that you can enjoy or that can make you laugh, whether it's a joke or maybe it's seeing a commercial that makes you laugh. Just finding a moment throughout the day where you can have a time that's to yourself, where you can just have a smile and a laugh. That's important. Can't stress enough the importance of remaining physically active, taking a jog or just taking a walk, getting outside of the house in a socially distant, in a safe environment, just for some exercise, for some fresh air. That can do a lot to help you, help your day. And another thing, there's so many distressing things in the wake of COVID. So when you hear things on the news that are distressing or that are just upping your stress level, considering limiting TV and limiting social media and news. You have to have a gauge as to when it's too much. And when you find that it's too much, just take a break from it. Another thing, being generous to yourself. These are times like no other. And we have to be patient with ourselves. We have to allow ourselves time to some days recognize that some days are better than others. Some days we may not accomplish as much as we like, but we have to be generous to ourselves and we have to be patient as well. Recognizing that everyone is in the same boat. And I say that broadly. There are different circumstances, there are different instances, but COVID-19 has resulted in adjustments for everyone. And while that's no consolation, sometimes it helps just to know that everyone is making adjustments, everyone is trying to adapt to these situations. And finally, which is certainly not the last tip, talk with someone you trust. Don't internalize how you're feeling, don't bottle it up. If you want to complain, that's okay. If you want to talk about how COVID, the requirements and how things have affected you, that's okay as well. It's okay to talk about things that you've given up. You know, that's not selfish. You're discussing how this has affected you. So I think all of those things are tips that are important as we're dealing with COVID that we need to recognize. But most importantly, being generous to ourselves and allowing ourselves to recognize that this is an adjustment. Next thing I want to talk about before we get into our main topic is the topic of depression among teens. So for so many years, there have been stigmas around depression, around not talking about it. And I think this conference is so important because it sheds light on what we can do to bring this to the forefront, because it's certainly occurring. When we look at depression, again, the statistics are startling. For example, 13% of US teens between the ages of 12 and 17 experienced at least one major depressive episode in the past year. 1 in 5 teenage girls had at least one major depressive episode over the past year. 7% of teenage boys had at least one major depressive episode over the past year. 7 in 10 US teens said that anxiety and depression were major problems among people their age. 7 in 10. 3 in 10 teens said they felt nervous about their day every day. And 3 in 10 teens reported feeling a lot of pressure to fit in socially. And finally, and unfortunately, almost 1 in 5 high school students had thought about suicide. So these are statistics that shed light on how depression is affecting youth, how depression is affecting teens. And this is something that we need to acknowledge and we need to bring to the forefront. Now, this is depression among teens in general. We also look at depression among African-American teens. African-American adolescents who viewed videos of police shootings online had higher rates of depression and post-traumatic stress symptoms. Now, in wake of all the killings that have occurred, this shows that these killings have an effect on individuals who view them. And I want to move now to vicarious racial discrimination because this is an example of it. Vicarious racial discrimination is the most frequent type of discrimination for African-American adolescents. So vicarious racial discrimination consists of discrimination that does not occur with you, but with someone you know, a family member or a friend, or racism and discrimination that you see on TV, such as police shootings. Those are all examples, and those all have effects on our emotional well-being. Back to the statistics. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among African-American children between the ages of 10 and 19. African-American youth and families may be less likely to identify their own mental health symptoms. So we talk about barriers to seeking mental health resources. That is one of them. Sometimes there is a stigma, not just based upon any factor, but we need to look at stigmas that are preventing individuals from seeking mental health resources. Lastly, when we look at those who seek mental health resources, African American adolescents are more likely to be referred to the juvenile justice system if they are experiencing mental health issues, while white youth are more often referred for mental health treatment. So there are disparities among access to mental health that we need to look at how we can advocate to make this better and more equitable. So now I'm going to talk about a form of stress, which is a microaggression. And if you've heard about a microaggression, this will be review. If you have not heard about microaggressions, we'll talk about it right now. So what microaggressions are include comments or actions that negatively target groups of people, particularly minoritized groups of people. Microaggressions can be intentional or they can be accidental. They can be subtle, they can be innocuous, they can be preconscious or unconscious degradations, but they are put downs and they can be hurtful. Microaggressions can occur based upon one's gender, one's socioeconomic status, one's sexual orientation, one's ethnicity, or one's race. And these are just a few examples of how microaggressions occur. It's also important to note that microaggressions can intersect based upon these things. What we're going to focus on today are microaggressions based on race. So a few examples of microaggressions, and unfortunately, I'm sure you have heard of these and you might not have trouble coming up with other examples, unfortunately. But when we look at microaggressions, one would be you're so articulate, as if what's the alternative? You know, like you're surprised. That's a microaggression. Maybe someone has a name that's difficult for that person to pronounce. And so a microaggression would be the person asking the person whose name is hard to pronounce to shorten their name because it's more difficult for that person to pronounce it. That's a microaggression. It's difficult for you, so you want to inconvenience the other person and not acknowledge the other person's full name so that it will be easier for you. That's a microaggression. The phrase, when I see you, I don't see color. That's a microaggression as well. So for example, if I have a red sweater on, that's as if I say, well, when I see you, I don't see your red sweater. If you have a red sweater on, I don't see your red sweater. To me, the question is, why don't you see my red sweater? What's wrong with that? So that's an example of a microaggression. Another microaggression will be when maybe someone crosses the street or gets on the next elevator, not to interact with you. That's a microaggression. You're fearful or you're hesitant, and the other person is affected by that. The phrase, and this is an example when microaggressions can intersect. The phrase man up is a microaggression. All right. Or asking, are you on the basketball team? You know, based upon outward appearance, someone might assume based upon your color or your race that you are on the basketball team. So it has assumptions to it. All of these are examples of microaggressions that occur. And these are just based upon race. Again, there are many different examples, unfortunately, of microaggressions that occur. Now, there are also types of microaggressions. There are micro assaults, there are micro insults, and there are micro invalidations. Micro assaults are the types of microaggressions that are intentional. They're explicit, they're verbal, or they're nonverbal attacks, but they're overt. And they're overtly racially discriminatory. So an example may be an athlete who is interested in politics. So maybe he takes an interest or she takes an interest in politics. A micro assault would be the assumption or the statement of saying, why doesn't that athlete just shut up and dribble? That's a micro assault. A micro insult is a microaggression that's rude and insensitive. It can be a subtle put down of someone's racial heritage or someone's racial identity. An example might be telling an African American college student that all African Americans are good at basketball. Okay, that's a stereotype and it's a micro insult because that's not the case. A micro invalidation would be a microaggression that diminishes, negates, or dismisses the realities and histories of people of color. So, for example, let's say that someone wants to celebrate Black History Month. A micro invalidation would be a student who rolls his or her eyes when another student expresses the need or the wish to celebrate his heritage or his race. Okay, that's a micro invalidation because it sends a message that it's not important. So those are types of microaggressions. When we look at forms of microaggressions, there are also three forms. So microaggressions can be verbal. So they can occur in the form of comments or questions that are hurtful or stigmatizing to a certain group. They can be behavioral. So they can occur when someone behaves in a hurtful or discriminatory way. And they can be environmental. They can be discrimination examples that occur within our society. So needless to say, microaggressions occur in various forms: verbal, behavioral, environmental, and so they're all around us. They're different types and they're different forms. So now that we've discussed the types and the forms of microaggressions and what they are, let's talk about the effects of microaggressions. The first thing that I want to talk to you about are how often they occur. So the average African American adolescent in the United States experiences over 5 incidents of discrimination a day. It's worth repeating. The average African American adolescent in the United States experiences over 5 incidents of discrimination a day. So these examples of discrimination can be microaggressions, just as we talked about. So these can lead to microaggressions are forms of racism. And what researchers have found is that chronic stress is a form of racism. And chronic stress leads to prolonged levels of exposure to stress hormones. These increase the likelihood of developing chronic diseases. Examples: depression, obesity, and even suicide attempts. So racial microaggressions have been described as feeling something over and over. And after you feel something over and over, it takes a toll. So the effects of microaggressions, which are these subtle put downs, can be increased anxiety, depression, shame, exhaustion or fatigue if you have to explain yourself or if you have to ask what someone meant over and over again. Anger, maybe you didn't address that, or maybe you're not pleased with how you handled the response to someone who committed a microaggression. Resentment for it occurring at all. Self-doubt, it may make someone wonder, am I equipped, or how did I handle this? Is it true what was said? Feeling powerless or feeling invisible. Microaggressions can turn into micro traumas. These microaggressions can be traumatic. And lastly, microaggressions can cause premature aging of the body. So when someone experiences stress, these stressful effects are having impacts on the body. And so these microaggressions, which are forms of racism and discrimination, can cause premature aging of the body. There's also what's known as stated stressfulness and derived stressfulness. So stated stressfulness is self-reported stressfulness from a situation. This stated stressfulness can result in diminished mortality, which is a shorter lifespan, confidence that is shattered or flattened or diminished, and doubts as to whether one is being overly sensitive. So for example, when someone commits a microaggression, they may say, why are you upset about that? I was only kidding. You're being sensitive. that can have an effect on one's stress level, and it can make one wonder, am I overreacting? Did I blow this out of proportion? One of the things that we'll talk about, and it bears repeating, but I'll talk about it now, is you are allowed to feel however you feel about a statement that is said. And you need to allow yourself that capacity to be upset or to address it, not to second guess how it made you feel. On the flip side, derived stressfulness discusses the impacts of racism and how it has effects on our psychological health. So it can result in increased blood pressure and stomach aches and headaches. Those are all examples of how microaggressions can affect individuals. When we look at racial microaggressions among African American teens, they can occur in the forms of assumptions of criminality. So microaggressions about criminality, about intellectual inferiority, how smart someone is, the universality of the Black experience. So the idea that, or the overgeneralization or the stereotype that all individuals of a certain race experience things in common. Jokes about one's skin tone or about one's hair texture. The question, may I touch your hair? Or that's an example. Or microaggressions about police brutality. When we look at the recent killings, those are all forms of or examples of how microaggressions can occur. And they're certainly not limited to these instances. So now that we've talked about what microaggressions include, forms and types, it's also important to talk about how we should handle a microaggression. One thing that we'll talk about is there's no right or wrong way to handle these instances. They occur fast, they occur subtly, and oftentimes it takes a while for you to reflect upon how you should have responded. So that's something to keep in mind. What we also know is the definition of a micro intervention, and that is the process of confronting a microaggression. So consider the following things when you experience a microaggression. Acknowledge and recognize your feelings. We talked about that before. Allow yourself to be upset or to be angry or to be hurt by a microaggression. Don't just sweep it under the rug and act as if it didn't occur. Allow yourself to feel these feelings that are associated with this microaggression occurring. Ask yourself how you're feeling today. Was it something that you can just minimize, or is it something that you're very upset about? Also recognize that these things occur in very different capacities. So how you feel about a microaggression today certainly may not be how you feel about it on the next day. Another thing is to ask for clarification. Communication is so important in a variety of instances with family relationships, with our peers. Communication is intricate. And so a lot of times we can alleviate or just ask for clarification if we feel that something is said as a microaggression. It can be as simple as, what did you mean? Can you clarify what you meant by that? I'm not sure what you meant by that. But the communication allows for additional opportunities to discuss and maybe clarify. And maybe this isn't what someone meant, but it's always something that is important and that we can do. Another thing that's important is to ask your relationship with the person. Is this something with whom or someone with whom you're invested? Or is it someone who you may not see again that's not as invested in your life? You can think about that and reflect upon it. If it's someone with whom you're invested, you may want to take the time to talk to that person about how it hurt you, how it upset you, how it angered you. It's up to you. And again, we are putting the power back into your hands as to how you handle this. Directly addressing the microaggression at that time, or not addressing it at that time. Sometimes you may want to reflect upon how you want to handle it, how you want to discuss it. That's up to you. Lastly, but not least, recognizing that these are learning experiences and the conversations may be uncomfortable, but these are necessary conversations. And a lot of times when we are having these moments They can be uncomfortable, but if we want to move the needle and if we want to progress as a society, sometimes it's important to have these uncomfortable conversations. The next thing that I want to do is talk about how we can deal with committing microaggressions. All right, so what if you commit a microaggression? And we want to make sure that we know that everyone makes mistakes. Okay, so we need to acknowledge that. So just because someone commits a microaggression does not mean that they have ill intentions, and it does certainly not mean that they're a bad person. We need to first of all learn from the experience. All right, and that includes seeking to understand the point of view of the person who experienced the microaggression. How did it make him or her feel? What can we do moving forward to learn from the experience? It's important uh, if someone commits an if you commit a microaggression, not to get defensive, to try not to get defensive, and to believe the other person when they say it was hurtful. So not to say, how can you feel that way? I can't believe you're so upset about that. If someone tells you that they're upset, it's important to acknowledge that and to recognize it and to believe it. The key is, what can we do moving forward to improve these situations, and how can we learn from these situations? So in conclusion, we've talked a lot. We've talked about depression. We've talked about the effects of depression. We've talked about the effects of microaggressions, the types of microaggressions, what we can do if someone commits a microaggression, and what we can do to talk about that if we experience this microaggression. So in conclusion, if these things occur, you can reach out to someone you trust. You can talk about it. Now, not just with microaggressions, in the wake of COVID and how we're experiencing so much stress during these times, it's so important not to internalize these feelings, to talk to someone with whom you trust and to express your feelings. It's of utmost importance to recognize that words matter. Microaggressions are words. They have effects on our emotional health, our physical health, our role and our importance, how we feel valued. So these things matter. They're not just simple jabs that go away and you brush off. They add up, they accumulate, and we need to acknowledge that. Recognizing that there's no right or wrong way to react to a microaggression. That's of utmost importance. Not everyone responds the same way or reacts the same way. And again, you need to do what's most comfortable for you. If you don't want to respond, that's fine. If you want to take it as a learning experience, that's something that you need to consider as well. But just recognizing that out of these microaggressions, there is room for growth. Everyone is on a journey and a quest for growth. And so we need to leave space for that. And we need to leave that open as well. Acknowledging, as we mentioned, how these microaggressions made you feel. I think that's important for people to know the effects of these statements. Recognizing that allies have power. We're not just talking about allies in terms of microaggressions. When you look at bullying situations, if you hear something that's inappropriate, acknowledging that that was not appropriate, that has a lot of power in and of itself. So even if you hear a microaggression, bringing it to attention and drawing attention to that person, letting them know that it was not appropriate and how it may be offensive. The last thing that I want to talk to you about, and this is of utmost importance, I leave and I look at society, I leave this conference and I look at society encouraged for the strength and the resilience that you have. We are in the best of hands. A perfect example of this is the conference that you are all putting forward. You're bringing attention to a topic that is so important when we look at mental health. And so when we talk about leaders in our community, when we talk about youth and the advancements that they're making, this is a perfect example of this. I'm so proud of you. I am encouraged to see what you're going to do as advocates, as those who are leaders in our community, in our society. I thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to seeing the great things that you all will do in the future. Thank you for this opportunity. It has been a pleasure. If you ever if you ever have questions or you need to reach out, feel free to contact me. My email address is below. Otherwise, I'm so proud of you. I thank you for this opportunity. Please continue to hang in there and reach out to others and talk to others about how you're feeling in the wake of COVID, in the wake of microaggressions, and everything. So just take care. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I look forward to the great things that you will do later on. Take care.
That wraps up our summit for today. Thank you to everyone here, and a special thank you to all our speakers for coming out today and teaching us. We hope you all enjoyed yourselves and were able to meet some new people with similar interests.
For those of you who are active on social media, we would truly appreciate the support if you could follow us on Instagram at SWL Movement and on Twitter at SWL Movement. Be sure to stay tuned for tomorrow, as day 2 of the Student Wellness and Leadership Summit will be just as exciting. Tomorrow, we will hand off our emceeing to 2 other amazing individuals. Thank you for attending our conference today, and we hope to see some familiar faces tomorrow.
Also, don't forget to enter into our Instagram giveaway, and through this, we'll be partnering with 5 Minute Journal and Aura Health and Wellness. So this giveaway will be a tiered giveaway where we have multiple winners in different levels. So our level 1 winner, which will be one person, will get a chance to win SWL stickers, a 5 Minute Journal, online gift card, and also an Aura Health and Wellness app subscription for a year. And then our level 2 winners, which will be 2 people, will get a chance to win SWL stickers, a 5 Minute Journal, as well as an online gift card. Then following that, our level 3 winners, which will be 3 people, are going to get a chance to win SWL stickers and stress balls. And then lastly, our level 4 winners, which will be 4 people, will get a chance to win a number of really cool and exciting SWL stickers. So other than that, we do have another giveaway, which will be for participants of our activity sessions. And in this giveaway, you'll get a chance to win one other 5 Minute Journal notebook. So there will be 2 winners for that type of giveaway. And other than that, that's all that I have to say for today. And we thank you so much for coming out. And from the team at SWL, we really are thankful that you all came out to participate today. And we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.